All right. Good morning. So my name's Will McAdams. Matt Boms. A tall drink of water here. Uh, this is going to be a little informal. We do have a slide presentation for you, but and as I understand it, we have Q&A set up at the tail end of the session. So we're going to have some information on the slides that we can happily revert back to if we want to bounce back to it on Q&A. So,
But
all right.
folks are welcome to ask questions.
Yeah, okay, if that's the way you want to run it, I'm happy with that. So just to introduce myself, my career was mostly in the chairs that you're in right now. I spent 11 years in the state legislature working in staff offices. 10 years of that was in the state senate. Recognize some of these cats I haven't seen in years. 1 year in the state house, and then I went over to the Public Utility Commission after a brief stint in the private sector, but the 2021 blackouts occurred, and we had to sort of glue the system back together again after that. Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Matt Boms. I lead a trade association called TABA. So to add that to the acronym soup that you're all familiar with, but we're a trade association for advanced energy companies. So we cast a pretty wide net. We have a lot of behind the meter companies. We're going to dive into some of those definitions in a minute. A lot of utility scale companies, transmission companies. I know y'all have learned a little bit about advanced transmission technologies. So we have a ton of member companies in our association, and I just want to say how grateful and humbled I am to lead this session with Will, because he's a humble guy and he won't brag about his accomplishments, but he's really taken Texas to the next level as far as his service to our state. So I just want to give him a shout out here.
That's really nice, Matt.
Yeah.
So it reminds me, let me lay out some of the context of what I do now. It'll help inform your questions. So I run a consulting firm. We are working with loads and what I call strategic enablers of all different shapes and sizes. Of the loads, they range from data centers that are seeking interconnection, but I also have factories where we are helping them try to get line of sight on when they could achieve grid service. Also work with oil and gas, trying to get grid service, which they've been seeking for about 5 years now. But in that vein, we work in the fields where we have visibility of transmission planning and development, distribution planning and development, as well as I called them the strategic enablers, those BYOG, those behind the meter capabilities to allow these people to either island or serve themselves in concert with achieving grid service. This has implications for everything that we're going to talk about today, because even though most of that is at the transmission level, you can also do what I'm describing at distribution. And smaller factories, HEBs, Walmarts, hospitals, they all have these capabilities, and we'll talk about that as they are moving into the system.
Is there anyone that needs clarification on transmission versus distribution?
I will definitely cover that on one of those slides.
We all feel comfortable with those two? Yeah? Okay.
Good. Okay, so let's kind of set the table on the environment that we're operating in now. All right, we're talking about distribution side capabilities. We're talking about demand side management, and we're talking about DERs, distribution energy resources. Those are resources, DERs are those resources that can produce an electron at a level that is less than 10 megawatts in scale. 10 megawatts is a threshold that once you cross that, then ERCOT registers you as a transmission level resource. So on the demand side, where does demand side management come from? Where was basically patient zero that caused the United States to start looking at those options? That started happening in 1974. It was called the Arab oil embargo. At that time, prior to that, in 1973, price per barrel of oil was $3. After that, it shot up to $12. The S&P 500 that year dropped 45%. It was a major game changer for the United States of America. A couple of, and this is illustrative to kind of frame the context where we're talking about solutions in Texas. In response, Congress enacted the corporate average fuel economy system in 1975, which forced manufacturers to nearly double efficiency within a decade. So all these charts show the product of that, especially during the 1980s and over the next 40 years, which fuel efficiency went up, carbon production went down, and then basically as the population of vehicles on the road increased, they became that much more efficient in everything. And it just shows you what type of, what a game changer certain events can become. With that, let's talk about the Texas shock that we experienced in 2021. That year, as you'll recall, Winter Storm Uri happened. The state plunged into blackouts for 4 days. Different systems were affected differently. Center Point area, we talked about that with some of your colleagues earlier. Center Point was disproportionately affected. Let's describe Center Point. Center Point is a heavily industrialized area of the state of Texas. The Houston Ship Channel is located there, and about 40% of the refining capacity of the United States is concentrated in or around that area. They have limited and finite transmission capability in and out of the system. They have limited and finite generation capability inside of their area. A lot of people live in Center Point, so you can't get acreage to build power plants. They are also in a so-called non-attainment zone. Power plants produce emissions. The federal government limits emissions, so you can't build there. That means Center Point, in my opinion, and when I was at the commission, is always blade running. Winter Storm Uri happens. The average person in the state of Texas to be without power that was curtailed was around 20 hours. The average person in the Center Point territory to be without power was 33 hours. Why the difference? They have a disproportionate share of industrial consumers in their area that cannot be curtailed. Because if you curtail them, different chemical reactions will start to run out of control. They will blow up. They will cause a benzene cloud to erupt that may kill everybody. So that's why you don't cut them off. So hence, you get down to why are DERs important? It's good to have backup measures. It's good to have internal capabilities in a different area. So we talk about what the catalyst of Winter Storm Uri did. As you see, right here, I wish I had a pointer other than my glasses, but DERs at the level of installed solar shot through the roof over the succeeding 5 years. And it's hard to see on this thing right here, but battery capacity also on those homes and businesses quintupled. We went from basically zero to over 250 megawatts of small sub 1 megawatt batteries aggregated together and installed on people's homes and businesses throughout the ERCOT system. That's as much as a power plant. And that's good stuff. Anything on that, Matt?
No, I think just to echo Will's point, the reason that Texans are going out and purchasing these technologies is mostly because of backup power, right? Like for the average Texan, they're not going to know as much as we're about to teach you in this class. So when they're going to Home Depot to buy a backup generator, the primary driver there is a Winter Storm Uri type event, right? Like that's what we're seeing out in the market is these technologies are more attractive because of reliability concerns, right? If you have a small business out in Houston, you're not going to want to go more than a couple days without power because that's lost profit for you and your family, right? So that's really the primary driver behind all of this. But we're going to unpack all of the other reasons why distributed resources are becoming more attractive.
So there were 2 lessons learned for people after that event. One, they wanted some type of physical, tangible, responsive capability on their home or business. 2, they were affected financially. We had over $200 billion worth of losses, either physically on people's homes that had burst water pipes, or 2, there were massive financial settlements that occurred after that event, energy settlements. As a result, people wanted to hedge against that volatility. So they started procuring and buying physical hedges. And that was everything from a Generac behind their home or business, or Caterpillar, I don't want to speak to any particular vendor, or a PV system, solar panels on top of their rooftop paired with a battery. We saw a lot of that. All right, a little bit of the history of the ERCOT grid in a nutshell. 25 years of energy price history and energy price action on one chart. It also gives the power resource mix over that 25-year period. You start out, this blue line, that's coal. Above that is gas, above that is wind, above that is solar, Above that is now battery. I'm sorry, wind is, yeah, that's right. I'm tracking. What happens over 25 years? Coal begins to go down. Why does coal go down? Natural gas price is volatile. Natural gas price fell off the earth in 2014. What happens in 2014? Hydraulic fracturing happens in 2014. Natural gas becomes ubiquitous everywhere. That has a direct correlation to the price of power that your customers, that your constituents pay. I want to make sure and drive this point home because we're going to talk about, when you start talking about DERs, what do people hedge against? They hedge against that natural gas price because it can turn on a dime and it is subject to international events just like we're seeing now. We do have LNG export terminals in the state of Texas that can export over 20% of our domestically produced natural gas. That affects the price of electrons in ERCOT. So you need to pay attention to it. The red line is the settled price of power in Texas over that 25-year history of deregulation. The blue line is what the rest of the country pays. You will notice the rest of the country is paying more for electricity than we are right now. The reason they're paying more is because they have capacity obligations that are now deficient because we are all in a period of sustained high load growth. And because of that load growth, they now have to buy insurance on top of a bigger forecasted amount of energy. That and natural gas. So as you see, Winter Storm Uri was a catastrophic event. Our prices spiked consistent with that. Okay, go ahead. All right, demand side solutions, are they properly valued in ERCOT? No, but they're better than anywhere else in the rest of the country. Anywhere else in the rest of the country, you have to go through some type of regulated apparatus to institute something. Here you do not. But why do people, we need value signals driving people to make that financial commitment to install new capabilities, to make that investment in heat pumps or any other type of a demand side solution. When you get into producing electrons, it's even more expensive. They need a price signal associated with that. One thing to remember about consumer adoption and the way we settle our demand response programs in ERCOT is twofold. One, it is not settled on a locational basis. Every other capability in ERCOT, and I see you getting sleepy, this is economics, I get it. Every other capability in ERCOT is settled on a basically neighborhood by neighborhood basis. So if you're at a transmission level and you're a power generator and you're selling in Pasadena, right outside of those petrochemical refineries, you get sky high price because you're right there next to that big industrial load. A demand side solution at distribution does not get the same cleared price. They are settled on a zonal basis. So it is the average of the entire Houston area. As a result, you do not get that targeted value stream. This is something that we need to work toward in the future. Before I left the commission, this is what we were trying to hammer on ERCOT to produce, because if you get that targeted value stream, then you start to see very targeted, hyper-accurate solutions evolve to both system management and then as well as hedge against volatility for everybody. Your prices start to come down.
Yeah, I would just add, if you look at this graphic, we're essentially forcing distributed resources through a very narrow path, right? We're going to touch on the whole value stack in a few minutes here. Right. But the way it works in ERCOT is a customer goes out and acquires the technology, right, on their own volition. Distribution planning essentially means that they're taking stress off of the system at their local substation, which is what Will is touching on here. So with the data center growth, with all the load growth that we're seeing in Texas, ideally what you want is to take some pressure off of the substations that are increasingly being overloaded in Texas. And that's beneficial ultimately to the grid and to the utility, right? That's what you want as a ratepayer, is you want to take that pressure off the system. And that leads to wholesale reliability, because we know the grid overall will be more reliable if we have more distributed resources scattered around the state. But what we need, to Will's point, is to identify where are those overloaded substations. Let's get some distributed resources in there, whether they're batteries, whether it's rooftop solar, backup generator, smart thermostat. There's a whole laundry list here of technologies that could help solve the problem.
Another thing you need to be aware of, okay, Gary asked a question, but I want to create the distinction between transmission and distribution because this is a huge factor.
No,
Go ahead.
I can wait.
All right. ERCOT does not manage anything on the distribution system. You need to realize that. They are a transmission system operator. Under federal authority and NERC guidelines, they manage the bulk power system. Transmission or distribution is below that level. That is going to be managed by your local utility, either your co-op, your muni, CenterPoint, Encore, AEPs of the world. This is important as we get down the road because ERCOT starts to get a little edgy when they start to see a lot of resources come in at distribution because there's an aspect of control to that, of visibility. And frankly, there's a middleman involved. There's the utility involving themselves in a resource or a capability rather than direct interface to ERCOT typically. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, so I guess that's a good segue. Is
Yep.
what about munis? Like, if I love base power, I think it's a cool idea. I can't do it because I live in Austin.
Right.
So what do we do about
Well,
that?
it was my view that anything involving the so there are principles involved in management of distribution level resources. I believe distribution level resources affect the bulk power system. If you get enough of them bundled together, you can ease system scarcity. You can ease constraints on the system. As such, a legal definition could be considered to give the PUC, it's not necessarily ERCOT, it's the Public Utility Commission authority to set standards over these resources because, in effect, they are behaving as wholesale market resources. But that is not in the statute currently. There is no distinction. And munis govern those areas at distribution just like their own kingdom. And the city councils ultimately are the decision makers.
We're about to jump into the barriers to DERs, and I think we might be able to answer that question through
That's
where
right.
the challenges are. So,
Okay, go ahead.
we're stuck. There we go.
Okay. You need to be advised there's a difference between active and passive capabilities. All right? Oh, that is a bad color for that screen.
We could read them off.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt. You've got the better angle.
So we got under active thermostat demand response, managed EV charging, battery dispatch, and ADER aggregation. Under passive, we got insulation, efficient appliances, heat pumps, efficient light bulbs.
The principle there is the active, you can call upon it instantaneously. ERCOT can dispatch that type of capability. They can meter it. Bottom line control. The passive approach is something that you expect on a daily basis, depending on the weather or the insulation of the house. But the point is that there should be some type of increment or incidental value that can be counted on in terms of ERCOT or the distribution system operator on a seasonal basis. And that's where we get into technologies. What type of technologies are being installed at the home, the business, the local level, and uniform conditions. There are no real uniform conditions on technologies that account for this passive response. The whole world, everything at Home Depot is open to this category. In terms of the actual dispatch, no, we can control that. There are market systems that dictate as a condition for participation what you're going to install and how you're going to behave.
Yeah, and I think this really speaks to why DER as an acronym is so difficult to unpack.
That's
I
right.
think when we go to your offices and talk about DERs, it's sometimes hard to get your head around what we're talking about. And we hear that a lot from legislators. So what we're trying to do with this slide is break it down into two specific categories. We're not comparing the two. We're not saying that active is better than passive or vice versa. They both have an important role to play. With the data center issue that we're seeing in Texas, if you're a large data center and you're going to build something out in a rural part of the state, ideally what you'd want is to take stress off of the system. That could be active or passive, right? If you can go seal up a bunch of homes that are leaky and using way too much electricity, potentially you're helping that family pay the bills at the end of the month because they're going to save a ton on their electric bills, and you're freeing up electrons for your data center that's going to need more energy, right? So that's a passive version. An active version would be, well, let's go out and deploy a bunch of residential batteries, right?
Right.
Because that can help us during a stress event on the grid.
I think one thing to remember is when I was at the commission, I used to say, we're going to pay different amounts for different type of performance. How bad do I need that electron at that particular time of day, or during winter or Hurricane Beryl, after the delivery system is to all torn up, and I need to support that neighborhood around me? How bad does that neighborhood need that electron, or how bad does that system need the electron? The value should follow that level of interest. And so I think there should be different values associated with one, the passive. It should be assigned and associated. But when you really need it, you should be able to pay more for it, and you should be able to receive more for it. All right. Okay. Okay. Kilowatt versus kilowatt hour. Y'all need to remember this. And I'm going to kind of use base power as a bit of an example because they're the new market participant. Okay, so a kilowatt is a measure of power for the rate of consumption at any particular moment. A kilowatt hour is a measure of energy, so the total amount of the electricity used over time. So in the base example, they're advertising 50 kilowatt hour batteries behind their homes. What that equates to is the average home in Texas uses 36 kilowatt hours in a given day. That's an average over all seasons. In other parts of the country, their average consumption on a daily basis is 26 kilowatt hours. What's the difference? We're a lot hotter, and we're a lot more volatile. Welcome to Texas. So that's going to make a difference when you start talking about how much stored or dispatchable or duration capacity you have. And all of that should be valued differently. Okay, go ahead.
The analogy, Will, that I like on this one is a car. So you hear that analogy a lot, where a kilowatt would be the speed of the car. The kilowatt hour would be the distance that the car has traveled. So if you think about it in that mindset, it can help you. Like the example that we have up here is you have a 100-watt light bulb running for 10 hours gives you 1,000 watt hours. The second example is you got 10 light bulbs at 100 watts each for 1 hour. It also gives you 1,000 watt. So the result is the same. The difference is the second example is using 10 times more demand than the first, because you're spending that all in 1 hour as opposed to over the span of 10 hours.
So another metric that'll be useful for your policy making, we start talking about rate classes, okay, and who exists at distribution level. The average restaurant or small commercial business consumes about 1,100 kilowatt hours. No, I'm sorry, that's residential. 2,200 kilowatt hours a month. So that equates to around, when the home is 36 kilowatt hours, it's going to be about 111 kilowatt hours. So it gives you those levels of consumption. An industrial is consuming megawatts. So it's that's as much as a Walmart or a super Walmart or a shopping mall. Put it in context for you. Okay. All right, Matt, you covered this very well earlier. You want to cover that?
Yeah, we did. We touched on this already. Customer resilience. So the first thing that DERs do really well is they keep critical functions running and lower exposure to high energy bills, right? So that's why the base power model, like Will mentioned, is so attractive to a lot of customers, because it's really lowering their exposure to the bills, and it's also helping the retail provider. So when a retail provider comes in and sells their service to a customer, what they're doing is they're basically hedging, right? So they're coming in, they're buying at the wholesale market rate, they're selling it to the customer. If that retail provider can come in and hedge high prices with, let's say, a residential battery, they're protecting their own business, right? They're saying, okay, so if there's a day where we know prices are going to be very high, we can tap into those residential batteries and cover the risk, the exposure that we have out there on the market. Local relief, meaning what we mentioned earlier about data centers. We're seeing feeders, substations, and constrained areas. This is the hot topic here in Texas. The whole country's looking at us on how we're going to solve the data center problem, and we're offering up a huge solution in this presentation. So this is where distributed resources, we're not saying it's going to solve 100% of the problem, but a very large percentage of the problem can be solved through DERs, potentially saving money for the ratepayer because they can do it a lot cheaper than what a new substation might cost, what the feeder might cost, and the new lines on the distribution grid. This deferral piece is what I'm talking about here. So the system peak, the way that we do pricing in Texas as far as 4CP, and we've got a rulemaking going on at the commission right now. DERs play a really big role into how the different stakeholders can limit their consumption based on the peak, the 4CP summertime months, right? Because if they have those backup generators running or the distributed batteries, they can potentially avoid a lot of those transmission costs, and we're seeing that out on the market. And then just the speed to power, right? This stuff can be deployed in a matter of months versus years,
That's
right?
correct.
It doesn't take very long to install rooftop solar, backup generator, a smart thermostat, a distributed battery. That stuff is just really quick to install versus this a critical grid infrastructure, which takes a long time. I mean, these high voltage transmission lines are going to take 5 to 10 years. And in the meantime, you can cover a lot of that demand using some of the distributed resources that are available.
So let me describe to you kind of a case in point how this stuff is useful, how it's absolutely essential to grid stability and reliability now. The way Winter Storm Uri went down, and part of my job was going in after the fact and creating the AAR around what happened and why did it happen. The sequence was that storm came in and it shut off a lot of generation all at once. It actually created a shortfall in the amount of energy supply on the system, which created an imbalance. ERCOT then went into a load shed protocol and cut off 4 million homes, actually 1 million at that point, all at once. This created an imbalance to the upside. The whole grid is predicated upon it remaining stable within 60 gigahertz at all times. It's just like a power flow. You just stay within this little range band. They were outside of that range band. When that happened, that actually tripped off 10 gigawatts of generation that was trying to ramp into the event and stabilize the situation. We were very close to a system-wide blackout. You've all heard about that. The environment that we're going into now is we're going into a high load growth environment. When I was at the commission, our biggest fear is that Comanche Peak or South Texas Project, our nuclear power plants, would trip offline, creating an instability event because we would have insufficient power to maintain flows on the system. Now, ERCOT's biggest concern is what happens if a big load, which is 1,000 megawatts, 1 gigawatt, trips offline and there is an oversupply of power on the system. Where DERs become very valuable is they become like a buffering system, a cushion. So all those batteries that I was talking about, those 250 megawatts of batteries, that acts as like a sponge, a shock absorber, so that if there's ever an imbalance, it has capacity to both absorb or dispatch back when it's needed. That's going to be real money in the coming years. And the whole premise is you need capabilities as close to the load centers, as close to the loads as you can get. You don't get any closer to rooftops than right outside their neighborhoods or on the rooftop. And so that is extremely valuable. So you kind of see how all this starts to play together towards system reliability and also financial stability to smooth out market volatility for consumers of all classes. Okay. ERCOT trust gap. ERCOT does have a trust gap on DERs. ERCOT does not really feel like they can control DERs. Remember, they are the manager of the bulk power system. These guys are not interconnecting at the bulk power level. They are at the local utility level. ERCOT also has questions about batteries because the Texas system, ERCOT's market design, is set up around a market. ERCOT does not feel like they have enough visibility into the state of charge of batteries at any given moment. State of charge, what is that? How much energy they have banked in the battery at any given time. ERCOT wants to have the ability to call upon that energy at any given time. There is a constant tension between the market and the centralized control of the grid operator. That's why they may not trust it. They're not wrong, but I would say they're also not right. The right path is somewhere in between. It's just like anything. And that's where you guys as the policymakers come in. Distribution value. We kind of talked about that. It's also, we talked about this disparity between the zones and the location and how it gets diluted the further away from that pain point of the system you get. That's why it needs to be very targeted. And then local permitting. You had several bills last session that addressed that. to try to create uniform safety condition for batteries entering the system, and also uniform permitting conditions where you're not dealing with 254 different standards, or how many municipalities are there? Over 1,000? I think there's over 1,000. So that's a problem. But y'all help level the playing field on that. So it's starting to become standardized.
On the DSP value gap, I think this goes back to your question, Gary, on the munis, and there is a huge problem that we have in Texas, which is the incentives for the utilities. I'm speaking about ERCOT specifically, right? So we only have 4 TDUs, as we call them, in ERCOT, right? What they do essentially is they build out the poles, wires, substations, hard infrastructure in Texas that we need to keep the grid expanding and keep the grid stable. What they don't do is generation, right? We don't allow them to dip their toes in generation. We have a very strict wall up since deregulation happened in 2002 that says these utilities just do capital expenditure. That's how they make money for their shareholders, right? The problem there is there's a huge disincentive to support distributed resources, right? They won't look at a new substation and decide to go the cheaper route for the ratepayer, which might be residential batteries, it might be demand response, it might be energy efficiency. There's a whole laundry list of things here that we could talk about. But essentially, they're not allowed to earn a rate of return on those technologies, right? So that's what we're talking about here with the DSP value gap. Now, the munis and the co-ops are in a different category because they are vertically integrated, right? They are allowed to invest in these technologies and potentially make a return on that investment, right? So we're seeing that, for example, in El Paso. El Paso just partnered with Base Power. They avoided a new substation. I think it was a $5 million investment in a substation that they deferred thanks to the partnership with Base Power, right? So we're seeing that in the non-ERCOT areas of Texas as well as the munis and co-ops. Now, they're all different. They all have their own internal politics, right, which you can unpack and talk about specific municipalities and why they're not going after these technologies. But they are, on paper, they're allowed to do it today.
So here's the rub. Here's the policy rub, guys. Remember there's a distinction between transmission and distribution. There's a distinction between transmission cost allocation and distribution. At transmission, you're going to have all of my factories paying their way. So basically the financial burden is socialized over a greater population of electrons that are being consumed. And it's being paid for by big business. At the distribution level, that's your grandma. That's your family. That's you. You live there and you pay for those costs. So there's going to be a question of whenever some type of capability comes in at distribution and they need some type of local upgrade to facilitate that thing working for the benefit of all, right now those costs are borne by you and the distribution level ratepayers. They are not uplifted to transmission where the big businesses pay their rate. So that's a question of if there is wholesale level benefit and it actually helps the management of the transmission network, should those costs be uplifted to the transmission network? So that's a policy consideration. But there's a lot of them. So you start talking about 5,000 of these things, 5,000 homes or hundreds of homes. You have to measure, okay, how much are those costs? How much to allow? It's all a question of cost allocation. Gary, you're rubbing your chin and know you want to ask a question, jump on it.
I'm thinking, go ahead.
Any questions? That's a little complicated.
That is a deep thought.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't solve it at the commission either, so lay it away. You're right on this.
Yeah, I could give this a quick go. So there's value streams across the supply chain. So you hear some economics here about a value stack, as we call it, as the nerds call it, right? So
Right.
a value stack basically means there's different layers of value that distributed resources bring, and how many of these are we actually tapping into, right? So like let's walk through it real quick. What does the customer get? Well, the customer immediately saves money on their bill, right? Like
Yep.
we know that. Like if they've got a battery in their home or business or rooftop solar, whatever it might be, they're saving money immediately, right? They'll have to make the upfront investment, but they'll recover that over time. Backup power, for sure, that's what we talked about at the top, right? People are going out and purchasing these technologies because of the reliability factor, comfort, resilience, so it makes sense from the customer perspective. Now, from the utility perspective, here's the cost deferral that we just spoke about, right? So the utility is deferring some of that capital, the CapEx as we call it, and they could go after some of these distributed resources. the local congestion, as Will is talking about, is a huge factor with all the load growth that we're seeing. The voltage support Will also touched on, as far as some of these batteries are a really important resource. If something trips offline, you want, as a utility, you want those batteries to step in and play a big role. You probably know what this means, but essentially in Texas, we have retail providers that, for the most part, serve as load serving entities. So this is what we spoke about earlier as far as the retail hedge, meaning that distributed resources are a great tool for a retail provider, right? Whether it's Reliant or any number of retailers in Texas, because they can use that against those high prices. So if the prices spike on, let's say, a winter storm event, right, that happens in Texas, then as a retail provider, you want all those batteries out there because it'll help protect you against those high prices. Customer retention, customers in general like these technologies, right? They like the fact that their prices are decreasing, so that'll help them keep customers. And then wholesale market revenues, we'll jump into that in a second. And then system-wide, like, when Will was a commissioner, what you want essentially on the system is to reduce that peak, right? You've got, think back to the kilowatt versus kilowatt hour slide that we had. We have a peak in Texas, which is what, 86
86 gigawatts.
that we hit a couple years ago. You want to protect against, you're building a grid for that peak, right? If you're looking at the grid overall, your goal would be try to lower that peak as much as you can, because that's when we're going to start hitting emergency grid conditions. That's what reporters call us about when there's a winter storm. Is like, right, is the grid going to survive, right? And DERs are really good as far as flattening that peak during a winter event.
And what I would say is, like, that emergency response, look, I want each neighborhood to be able to serve themselves. I also want them to be able, like I said, it's all about the 3rd Ward in Pasadena. Okay, it's where you're sitting right next to the Chevron refinery, and that refinery may do whatever it does, but the people around that are having to pay a higher price because that substation is one of the most valuable substations in the state. So I want them to, if they can be able to take themselves offline, and you guys are familiar with the ERCOT heat map, when it shows those high prices and the whole dadgum, or Houston goes red and the whole rest of the state is blue, that's a bad thing. That means everybody in the 3rd Ward is paying sky-high prices at that time, and they can't hedge against it. We need to be able to allow them to hedge against it, and that's where they experience that value stream associated with capability at their level.
Yep.
All right, and these are the buckets of capabilities. 4CP, the 4 coincident peaks. So at distribution level, there are, I work with Enchanted Rock. Enchanted Rock installs backup power systems on behind HEBs and Walmarts. Bundled all together, they help those customers avoid transmission costs. So there's 2 pieces of your bill that you can't avoid, theoretically: your transmission costs and your distribution costs. This helps them offset any type of payments they make on transmission costs because they are not contributing to the new peak that would establish the need for a new transmission line. That's the concept. You can ask a question on that in a bit. Then you get into the volatility of retail plans. All right, so if you're buying power from Reliant and you're in Houston, they're having to hedge more around that Chevron refinery in Pasadena because that LMP is that much more volatile, because there may be a choke point there because they got a big user on one side of it. So we want that plan to be able to offer discounts because they know they're able to buy power from some neighborhood around there. That's part of the synergy of the policy. Then you've got the emergency response system. This is created by the commission. It's basically a demand response capability that ERCOT employs. It's about 1,000 megawatts that they generally target. You can have both power generation participating in it, but mainly it's demand response. People who are willing at a 30-minute notice to be able to turn off the system and stay off. Then you've got energy efficiency programs. This is the Daikin's of the world. This is where they are so efficient, the system can count on their efficiency at extreme temperatures, extreme hot and extreme cold. And we know that that demand otherwise will not materialize, so we won't have to build new power plants or new transmission lines to support it. That's a net positive for society. Then you have the ADER program. Okay, I helped create this. This is virtual power plants. This is where you produce an electron and you can sell it into one of the emergency power programs that the state administers. This allows you to experience benefit. And then the Texas Backup Power Package. Matt helped create that, and it just went live. The commission adopted rules the other day. This allows hospitals and other critical facilities to basically get a grant and pay for backup power on their facility and back themselves up. Unfortunately, you can't participate in any state program or experience any value from it, but you basically get a free generator. Any questions? Okay.
I think just real quick to give Will some deserved credit on the ADER program. That really was continues to be extremely innovative. Like across the country, there are only a handful of virtual power plants that are up and running. And if I'm not mistaken, Texas was one of the first in the country, like really leading the nation as far as what you set up at the
We
commission.
get a great slide on that. Next slide.
Oh, okay, cool.
So,
I'm jumping ahead. Okay.
Anyway, go ahead. All right, I want to toot the horn. This is where we started it. Basically stood the thing up in 5 weeks over at the PUC, launched it. This is where we're at now. And between then and now, we started with 0, and now we're at over 160 megawatts. I'd like to thank Base Power, apparently belly flopping into the market. So they put in a lot. But at the end of the day, the capability is expanding quickly. I'm telling you, folks, if they ever sign the value on a locational basis to where it doesn't dilute, this thing will take off. Now, what you need to understand is who can participate in that, what type of capability. Because people have asked me about Generacs and Caterpillar behind the house generators. That is a dirty power source, not because of carbon or soot or anything like that. It's a violent power source. Whenever all those Generacs and Caterpillars turn on at once, remember the whole grid is predicated on stability, maintaining power flows in a stable way. It actually sends a surge into the system. It creates an overload of inertia, and it is called a dirty power source. So it is not usable to the level that ERCOT can use it right now, unless they can figure out some way to smooth out that power flow. So that's one of the technical impediments to utilizing that, but I would love to, because those things sit on top of basically captive natural gas delivery systems that support all of your pilot lights in your cities, which is a very stable source of natural gas. It would be a massive amount of power. There's gigawatts laying behind all those natural gas generators. Outside of that, it's going to be solar panel arrays on your roof paired with batteries. That can be telemetrically controlled by ERCOT, instantaneously controlled and engaged, and provides you instantaneous reliability benefit.
Well, we haven't seen electric vehicles yet.
Not yet.
In the future, I would think that they would be eligible right in the future to participate.
Absolutely. Half the battle is the charging stations. They haven't thought about subscribing or installing the technology on the charging stations, because that's a massive amount of power you can control, or any type of the commercial developers in the garages, the office building garages, to be able to control the power associated with those charged vehicles. But that's the next frontier. That'd be a lot. Go
Could you
ahead.
speak a bit about, so I've heard you mentioned demand response and how it
I knew you'd
basically-
key in on that, Gary. That's why I just let you ask a question.
All right, so like demand response, I love the idea. I love the notion of a
Right.
well-controlled ancillary service to generate demand response. Seems like there's a bit of a muddying of the waters between 4CP and pure demand response. So can you kind of talk about that a bit?
Yeah,
Or-
you're not going to catch me defending 4CP, but the principle is I want some type of means to where we talked about this earlier. I do not want ratepayers to not have any consequence of consuming energy when it's going to drive up the need for new infrastructure. I want them to have a reason to avoid driving that need. Otherwise, we will be building transmission systems forever. The utilities will love you for it, and I will invest tomorrow if that's the system you create. But they should have some type of reason to curtail or throttle consumption over those peak hours. And so, baked into that number, and this is what I pressed Tiffany on, there's 3 gigawatts of crypto load inside basically the overall 4CP demand response. 1.7 gigawatt on top of that of your normal factories
Mhm.
and people who can curtail.
Yep.
So there is a distinction, and there's something to be said. I don't represent a crypto guy, and I'm not going to throw him under the bus. But when I was at the commission, I asked the question: are we paying people or providing them some type of benefit to do something that they are already going to do anyway? It's a valid question.
Yeah, and also to like no residential customers in this graph, right? Like they're not
They
not
can't.
eligible. They
can't.
can't participate. So when you get those text messages from ERCOT, I guess it was a couple summers ago that we had that really hot summer in 23.
Yeah, I was still there.
Yeah,
Correct.
so Will was there. Yeah, Will was sending us the text messages.
The text alert.
But there's no incentive for the customer. If you're a residential customer in ERCOT, like you get a text message, and hopefully you're a good Samaritan, but they're not. No
Yeah.
one's paying you to voluntarily turn your thermostat up on a hot day.
I think there's a happy medium. I think there is probably it's too rich right now. There's too much incentive to just basically get paid for doing something you were going to do anyway.
And walk me through why you'd want EVs to be able to be in ADRs, because if they charge back to the system, then you can't get anywhere.
Right. Yeah, I love that question. And that's like where we nerd out on this V2G. They call it
Yes,
V2G.
his wheelhouse. Get on.
So V2G is an acronym, but it's vehicle to grid is what it's called, and we're seeing it in different parts of the country. Essentially, it means you're getting paid as a customer to send your electrons back to the grid, because these EVs are essentially just batteries on wheels, right? That's all they are.
Mobile storage.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of ways you could set it up to work. The best ideas that I've seen in practice have been time of use rates, which utilities hate. What time of use rates are basically,
Yeah, I hate that.
you are being encouraged to charge at a specific time of day, right?
Right.
So retailers like Tesla Energy, for example, will offer you like free charging at night, right? That's a great example of time of use rates, right? Because they're encouraging you to charge your car at night instead of during the daytime when prices are a lot higher.
Yeah.
But a true V2G, right, in practice, in theory, we haven't really seen it at scale across the country. But what it would mean is you're hooking up an entire station, to Will's point, which is a ton of energy. Like once you start aggregating all these different electric vehicles, it looks a lot like what a battery at scale would look like, because you've got a ton of capacity in those different EVs. So
The beauty of the ADR system is you can set the thresholds of whatever you want. You can create a floor to where you're not going to drain the whole thing. You're going to, and this is what Base is doing. They're not draining the whole thing. They're bidding in probably 30% of the total capacity of their battery, where they know they've got the homeowner taken care of. The rest is just that can go to the system.
Yeah.
Because you're never going to drain the full 50.
Okay.
Yeah, the latest example I saw was in Maryland. So if y'all want to like look up more information, it was Ford Lightning partnered with the local utility
Yes.
to aggregate all of their lightnings and pay customers according to how much they send back to the grid. So
Okay.
Okay. How many more slides do we have? Go ahead.
I think this is the last one.
Okay, this is the Energy Waste Advisory Committee. Okay, the concept was there is a lot of money floating around over the last 10 years, 5 years certainly, that between the state and the federal government that has been channeled into 5 state agencies. There's about $3 billion sitting in them that all contribute to some type of energy efficiency program or frankly active demand response. What I looked for as a commissioner and what I was praying for at a time when market design was being discussed, did we have enough supply to equal demand, was I wanted any type of accredited capacity that I could count on. So the Energy Waste Advisory Committee was created to channel the forces of all of these 5 state agencies, from the Public Utility Commission, which is running ADER, to TCEQ, which is managing TERP, to TDHCA, which is managing weatherization programs, basically installing all this new technology on people's homes. There's an accredited value associated with that. There's a demand reduction that you can count on associated with that. In every home that should happen to, I want ERCOT, that being fed into ERCOT so that they know it's happening. So in the forward years, when we start seeing we're going to have 30 gigawatts of new batch zero large loads come in, do we have enough supply? I'd like to know if it's 38.5 gigawatts of actual demand. And that $3 billion could help pay for some of that stuff. So it helps the state and all the various arms of the state act in concert toward a central goal, which is lowering demand over our most high stress periods. And usually that's summer, but I'm becoming more and more fearful of winter, and that's because of the 2021 experience. That's the premise.
Yeah, and you'll hear more from Kurt in a little bit as far as the what Daikin is offering in their technology, but the estimate out there is anywhere from 12 to 14 gigawatts of electric resistance heating. And to put that in perspective, like the peak load we were talking about before, winter peak is at 82 maybe.
That's
Is that
correct.
right?
It's
So-
not that far off from summer. It's terrifying.
Right. Yeah. So if we're at peak 82 gigawatts in the wintertime, and we're saying there's 12 to 14 gigawatts of electric resistance heating out there, then like that's the low hanging fruit. Like that's the easy stuff. If you wanted to prevent a future catastrophe from happening,
That's right.
you would probably go and seal up all those homes, right, and replace the resistance heating with more modern technology.
It's similar to what y'all talked about in the water space, all those leaking pipes that, 2036 has identified, all that water loss, same concept. I mean, when we were talking about different safety conditions at the PUC, different reliability standards, I actually talked to home builders, different developers from across the country, and tried to figure out what the average ambient temperature that the average Texas home could withstand in case we do have another Winter Storm Uri, in case we do have another grid near miss collapse, to see just, okay, what kind of backup systems do we need to plan for in order to ensure that everybody stays safe, nobody dies? And it's a difficult question, but Texas has a lot of old homes, old technology.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that might.
Oh well, this is the laundry list of.
Yeah, this is everything y'all have done, and a lot more, but I won't go through it. I kind of want to see if y'all have any questions, and you can ask me about anything you want. But these slides, I think, will be provided to everybody. That is, oh yeah, what do we need? Great point, folks. We need uniform technical standards. We need uniform standards for integration of DERs, both demand response, but especially if you're producing electron. We're dealing with, gosh, there's 63 munis, 67 munis, 74 co-ops, right? And then 5 major investor-owned utilities. Each one of them has their own different approach to integrating a DER. There's no uniform condition. You guys are the great leveler. There's no interconnection standard. There's no interconnection agreement for them. So there's no standardized contract. It creates barriers to entry. And if we believe these are a good for the system, a societal good, if you believe they bring a feature to both the financial health of the system as well as the reliability health, that needs to be considered. Right before I left the commission, we were almost there on interconnection standards. There was a rulemaking in flight. We had basically agreement from the major utilities on what that would look like. But the question is, should that be applied not just to the investor-owned utilities, which the PUC clearly has oversight of, or should that be applied to all utilities? That's a policy question.
Yeah, I'll just put this up because it's 54233. Folks want to look up the rulemaking, but it's been pretty much stagnant for 3 or 4 years now.
Well, I've been gone for 2. Definitely stopped in.
Yeah.
So.
And to Will's point, we pride ourselves on being a pro-business state. This is one area where we really need to improve because this should not be a bottleneck for millions of customers that would like to install their own distributed resources. But unfortunately, like Will said, it's every utility has their own rules, and even within the utilities themselves, depending on who's reviewing your application, you could get a different answer because there's no uniform standards in place. So that's a clear area for improvement.
It's pretty shocking when you get down into the weeds of it.
Mm-hmm.
Are co-ops participating in ADER?
Bandera.
Mm-hmm.
I love Bandera. Good one.
So I guess a question that I've personally had with some of these entities is they push back and say, we don't want the PUC to steal our thunder and take our kingdom, and what do you say to that?
The co-ops are.
This is a whole. This is providing wholesale benefit to the manage of the system.
Agree, sir. I do. I mean,
It's like a reliability asset. I mean, and you're telling me we can't set minimum conditions on that?
And I am relaying what I have heard from these entities. So.
I know. Well, you just saw a repeat of how I reacted to it.
For sure.
Also, Gary, it's not, and I agree. They're absolutely one of the barriers here, and the utilities themselves will argue safety concerns, the line workers. There's a whole list of, but these are proven technologies. Like we're not reinventing the wheel here. I mean, there are plenty of other states that are already doing this. Certainly in Texas, like why is it? I'll give you the example of El Paso again. Why is it that El Paso can defer a $5 million substation with working with base power
Oh,
on?
they're special. They found the secret sauce to something.
Right. Yeah. So whereas for other utility, I can say them. I mean, Encore, Centerpoint, the ERCOT TDUs will say they're not safe, and we have concerns. Well, it's like that doesn't quite match up. The ERCOT utilities should be going after this stuff the same way that in El Paso or
Should be.
a CPS or right. We got to match that up. We got to match the incentives there to make sure they're all going after the distributed resources, and that includes co-ops, munis, all of them. It's a reliability problem more than anything else, and it's affordability too, because ultimately we're trying to save money for customers, right? Like the rates are going up, and I think that all of you have heard constituent concerns, right, over the last several months on energy costs. So here's a solution.
Well, and then you hit up that second one, the distribution efficiency payments, basically earning for those deferred costs. So it's a question of, like, look, if they don't have to build a power line because they got enough of this stuff down there that everybody has to pay for, maybe they get some type of benefit from interconnecting these things and more efficiently managing their system. So this is something that y'all can noodle around on, but create different value streams for the utility, not to become an impediment, but more of an expediter toward these ends. Mm-hmm. And then clear cost treatment, we talked about that, trying to make distribution D level resources get the same value stream as T level, like big generators. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's it. All right. Any questions? Distribution level stuff is not sexy. I know that. But when you're in a pinch, boy, it pays off big time. Yeah. And I think what you will start seeing in the future is at the transmission level, you will start seeing more behind the meter generation. You'll start seeing even some islanded configurations. Okay, islanding is where you're not connected to the grid. It's microgrids. It was asked at State Affairs the other day, what's a microgrid? Because some of these things aren't so micro. No, they're not. They're huge. They're like city states, and they will be that way. If that is happening at the T side, at the transmission level, you do not want the distribution level to fall behind that. You want similar type of configurations growing and flourishing, because that will help support resiliency. It'll pay off dividends. And just look at the Centerpoint example. Centerpoint passed a bill. I approved of the policy in the bill at the PUC because the legislature told me so in writing, that they could use mobile generation, mobile batteries, to support system resiliency. Okay? That did not work out so well during the most recent hurricane. And the legislature called them on it. Y'all said that was bad. And so the point is, you could replicate the same features, same attributes that Centerpoint was doing with those mobile generators by just contracting on an ADER basis or at the distribution level with private parties on people's rooftops and homes. And so I think there's different ways to skin a cat, and that's why it's important that you keep this in mind, because you're going to be tempted just to think about the bulk power system, transmission, because that's the topic of the day. But it always wasn't so. When Centerpoint was out of power for 33 hours on average during Winter Storm Uri, distribution was incredibly important, and it can save people's lives.
You had a question?
So you talk about the need for uniform standards. What are some of the things that we need to be considering when you're talking about distributed energy, that kind of stuff? You touched on a few things. I've heard of some others. You touched on the safety aspect. So them being properly installed so that there's an automatic switch, so that it's not charging the lines and potentially impacting line workers, etc. There's, I've heard people need to consider that the structural integrity, their roof may or may not be able to withstand that much additional weight, etc. Insurance impacts for the homeowner's insurance. Also, one of the other items that I heard was, if you purchase solar panels, put them on your house and everything, you may have that contract and you may be paying them off for the next 10, 20 years,
right,
whatever. Mm-hmm. But if you sell the house, the new owner is not necessarily obligated
Right.
to pick that up. So what are the things that, whether it's just educating society or standards that we need to be developing, what are those, what are we not thinking of?
Standards that would apply across the board, across all utilities. Think about what you do, like if you were going to a city for a permit on your house, what are the things that you would want? I want some type of automatic review or basically a shot clock associated with, okay, how long do they have to review this? When do I get feedback on that application? What is the automatic contribution in aid of construction threshold? How much money do I have to put down and when as a part of that process? These are all variables that differ across hundreds of systems throughout the state. That it would behoove everybody to have some type of cookie cutter approach so that you could scale it quickly. Does that make sense?
I also think, broadly speaking, if the incentives are in place for utilities to go out and encourage distributed resources, then they will find a way to make it work, right? Like Jason Ryan at Centerpoint testified last week at House State Affairs along with Base Power, and they spoke to their shared experience where applications were taking far too long. And because of that, Jason said that they decided to partner with Base Power, right, and send out their engineers and electricians and work together to try to speed up that process and go visit folks' homes together. And they had to, shut the home off for a few hours. They would do that. They would coordinate better to get this stuff out there. So I do feel like there is some we could do better as far as the cooperation between utility and DER company.
It's exactly right. It sets a minimum level of expectation on the part of both parties.
Mhm.
Y'all do that all the time. Real estate, promulgated forms, TDLR, you name it. State does it every session. Hundreds of bills every time.
We'll go ahead and move on, I'm running low on time.
Okay.
But, thank you, everyone, can you give it up for our lovely speakers today?
Thank you.